Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Lya Badgley, author of the book The Worth of a Ruby. In my book review, I stated that I thoroughly enjoyed Lya's first novel, The Foreigner's Confession, and was super excited to get my hands on this one, set in Burma. Badgley writes edgy international crime suspense and gets the reader into the mind of her characters. Mallory Jones, a chef like the author, wanted to open a restaurant in Burma, but not because she was in love with the area. Instead, she was running from her past. However, as is wont when folks try to escape their past by running from it, the past found a way to erupt. As plans for a restaurant fall through, we see a side of Mallory that isn't evident in the beginning. The Worth of a Ruby has it all. Great characters, amazing backdrop, kidnapping, blackmail, murder, and a bit of Burmese magic. Plus, in the words of the author, I like ambiguous endings. Don't miss this book. Today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Lya Badgley, author of The Worth of a Ruby. Welcome, Lya.
Thank you, Terry. It's so nice to be back. I feel like we're on other sides of the country, but this is like, oh yeah, coffee time with Terry.
Oh, coffee time. I know. It is wonderful to be able to be together again. I've chatted with Lya in the past with her first book that all of a sudden my mind has gone blank. Lya, what's the name of the first one?
The Foreigner's Confession.
Foreigner's Confession. Fabulous book. But today we're talking about her second, The Worth of a Ruby. But before we really get into it, yeah, there it is. Before we really get into it, Lya, would you give everyone just a quick preview of what is this book about?
Well, the logline or the little blurb says, a priceless Burmese ruby leads Mallory Jones on a journey from the remote mountains of Burma to the swelter of Bangkok in search of redemption. So it's sort of a you could say it's an adventure story, set in a country that perhaps most people have not visited. And so it's an opportunity to learn about a new culture and sort of follow the experience of this young woman. She's a Seattle chef and she goes to open a restaurant, and then she gets involved in a little bit over her head. And yeah,
that would be putting it mildly, Lya.
That's right. You read it, Terry, haven't you?
Yes. I would say she's significantly over her head. Okay. So this is your second novel with this Southeast Asia setting. So tell everyone, why did you choose Burma and why 1995? What prompted this setting?
Well, people encourage authors to write what we know. Mm-hmm. So our stories are more authentic and read true. I was born in Burma, Myanmar, and lived there as a child. And then I returned in the 90s to open a restaurant. So I was that Seattle, not a chef, but a project manager that went there to do that. And so I did not do many of the things that Mallory does, but I definitely could speak knowledgeably about what it was like opening a restaurant at that time in this country that had been closed for so many decades. And mm-hmm. I do speak the language and I do all of that. So I drawing from personal experience.
Right. So what are some of the similarities then between you and Mallory? What is you
spoilers.
without the spoilers, but what are some of the similarities between the two of you that that were really you? Like, I'm curious, like, knowing that I've read the book, I'm curious, like, how much of this is Lya and how much of this is Lya's imagination. So,
well, okay. So I some of the characters in the story are based on or influenced by people that I knew
okay.
in the country, both expats as well as local people. I did have an interesting experience in the north of Burma, where Burma is very complicated, many ethnic groups
Mm-hmm.
who have their own, languages and customs and cultures. And so I visited one of these parts in the very remote part of Burma, and so I was able to draw one of my characters based
With
on
those,
that.
right, right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would say that all of it is a little bit of me, but the extreme nature of where she goes is completely invented. But we all kind of imagine what would we do in certain circumstances,
Right.
and fantasize. Yeah, I could definitely, put
Would
an
I
eye
do that?
to
Wouldn't I do that?
that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I tell people that what I often do is, I draw upon things that I know, but in one of my books, I have a woman who has extreme hunger. I've never been that hungry, but I do know what hunger feels like. And so you play that what if game. Well, what would I do if I hadn't eaten for a week? What would I do if I hadn't eaten in 2?
Yeah.
What would I
Well,
do if my amount of food was only this amount every day? Like what would I do? And so you're saying it's the same thing. You
yeah,
took this
yes.
scenario and it's like, well, what would I do if?
Similarly, yes.
Yeah.
And I have this, overall themes to my work where I explore within myself sort of the legacy of colonialism and imperialism on countries around the world. So I did that with Cambodia, and now doing it with
Right.
Burma, and doing it a little bit on the piece I'm working on now, which is set in Bosnia. So I often have this sort of backdrop of places with a history of conflict and American influence, for better
Right.
or worse. So I like to educate a little bit with what my stories are, but I also want, I don't want that to, be like a history lesson. I just want
Exactly.
people to enjoy the story, but at the same time be exposed maybe to sort of themes that they might not otherwise.
Right. I like that. When you were in Burma in 1995 trying to start a restaurant, did you see some of the same political turmoil that you show in the book? Is that pretty much true to what you found?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's actually rather timely because the country is now called Myanmar, and most Americans are not aware of that place, but
Or they've heard that name. I've
and they
heard
don't.
the name. I don't know that
Myanmar,
I could
right.
find it on a map.
Exactly. So if
Right.
many people know where Thailand is or India,
Right.
so it's in between those countries, and it's it has the dubious honor of being the longest running civil war in
Oh,
history.
yeah.
And because those independent groups have been for decades fighting for autonomy against the dominant group, who are the Burmans or the Bama, hence the name Burma, which is what the British gave it. But many years ago, when they were the colonizers.
Right.
I went off on a tangent here. Reel me back in, Terry. So it is a very interesting country that has relevance today because there was yet another coup. There have been many coups.
Okay.
And Aung San Suu Kyi, some people will remember her. She won the Nobel Peace Prize some years ago. Her party were democratically elected, and then there was yet another military coup in 2021. And so the fighting now has taken on a different flavor, aspect, shall we say, because it's gone into the the heartland of the country, not just the periphery of the country.
Okay.
And it's really quite horrible, horrific what's happening. We know about Palestine and Israel. We know about Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
But not many people know about Myanmar. And same thing is happening. Genocide is happening there right now. And
Right.
so my story, it's sort of set. So my story is set in the 90s, but oh my gosh, the same things are happening, even worse, right? So
Right.
that's the relevance of my story to today.
So you and I both have that horrible thing that happens where I wrote a story about Ukraine,
Yeah.
and it came out, and immediately Ukraine had war 4 weeks later.
Yeah.
And I wrote my latest story. I started it, and it was about a healer.
Yeah.
And immediately thereupon getting started, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And it's like, oh my gosh, my next book is going to be world peace.
That's what I'm working on. I'm working on no more war.
No
please.
more war. Yeah. So you and I seem to have that going on. But I think part of it is maybe we're just kind of tied into what is going on in the world. Even if we didn't do it purposefully, it comes up.
Well, I don't know if and also, so yes, so on a global level or higher level, but also I don't know if this works for you too, but on a personal level, so I've written 2 books now, and I think I know what they're about. I mean, I have a general plan,
right?
But after the book is written, then I have this, oh, that's what that was about.
Yeah, no, I do that.
On a personal level.
Yeah,
so,
I do that too, where it's like, and in fact, it was really funny. The first book that I wrote, so Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, when I was done and my editor said to me, so tell me about the themes, I was like, themes? I wrote a book. Like I had this idea and she started telling me the themes, and it was like, oh, wow. I wrote themes.
I don't
Look
know.
at that.
Did I do that?
Yeah. Whoa. And so I think sometimes the themes kind of, the story is there that you have this desire to tell, and then the themes work themselves in because of the characters that I write who are part me, and they're the themes that I tend to be exploring in my own world at the time, or that I wish others would explore, or whatever. I often have racism or xenophobia, those kinds of things. This fear of people who are different than us often show up in my books, which is something that I explore. So
yeah, I think that was what first bonded us.
Yes,
exploring that because we
both do, right? You do that as well. You do it more in this idea of like the genocide and the fear of, not even fear, but this idea that the West comes into the East and says, "Look at all we can do for you," and the East is like, "Yeah, but we didn't ask."
Right.
We didn't ask,
get out,
right?
But don't take all of our timber and all of our oil and all of our natural resources with you.
Right. And so there's just that idea that I think we do that. I love that. I'm curious. I look at your book and I try to put a genre on it, and I have a very difficult time. So my question is, do you write with a genre in mind, or do you write a story and then look for the genre that most closely fits what you've written?
You just said.
Yeah.
It's I'm a creative first and a businesswoman second.
Right.
So my desire as a writer is to tell the story, and that's my passion, and that's the story encompasses me, and then I move where the story takes me, which is, I think, different. There are many writers, excellent writers, who have a more formulaic approach, who have found their lane and are happy there, and they're very successful. And if I could learn how to do that, maybe I would do that, but
I don't know that I would.
That doesn't bring me joy. And I'm blessed to have a very supportive husband who is willing to allow me to have this expensive hobby, because
Yes.
it's expensive putting books out.
It is.
And
It is.
it's very, very difficult. As you know, there's only like, there are hundreds and hundreds of books being released every day as we speak. And the ones that make a living at it are what, like 1-2%. So
few and far between, right?
Yeah. So
right.
So you can't go into this, expensive hobby with the assumption that you'll make a living at it. Though there are people who do. And
I hope that you and I become that person. That would be fabulous.
That
I tell people all the time, that isn't me now. I'm not saying I don't want it to be. I'd love for that to be. But you and I also have that in common. I don't, they talk about like stay in your lane, and I am against that completely.
I love how you jump around with your books. I love your books, Terry.
Thank you. So, I have 3 that are considered historical fiction, but it's 1970s, World War II, and 1890s. So it's not like I have a particular lane. And I'm currently writing a book that is modern day, kind of a comedy. I say it's a comedy with a little side of romance, but the romance is like a little side. It's mostly comedy about a woman going through menopause. I have 2 books coming out soonish, I hope, that are inspirational about my ride across the United States on a tandem bicycle. And I have a children's book that I'm writing. And so it's like, I don't have a lane. Yep. My lane is I'm an author. That's my lane. And if you don't like it, well, and I think you kind of have the same idea. I don't necessarily write a book thinking about a genre. I don't say, today I'm going to sit down and write a mystery. I say, today I'm going to write this story that has been in my head. Yeah. And then afterward, I have to go through the agonizing thing of pick the categories it belongs in. And it's like, right?
Yes, correct. It's very difficult to, as you know, as independent authors, we have to, well, everybody now, even if you're published with a traditional publisher, we have to market ourselves and finding, on this relatively narrow bandwidth that is sharing all of these different voices of look at me. It's very difficult to get the attention. And as I go, I'm learning, which, I'm social media is probably not where I'm, those sales platforms is probably not where I'm going to sell many books, but I sell a lot of books when I'm face to face to people and engage in conversations. And so I'm shifting my marketing to be more sort of in person, which means I'm never going to sell 10,000 books in a week, I'm, like Kristen Hanna, but we do what we can, and a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is doing what you and I are doing right now, is being open and public, and who knows who's listening, and
just talk about what it is we do and why we do what we do and how we do what we do, and should we do what we do, right? So in your book, I'm just curious, who is your favorite character in?
Ooh.
Yeah, like I'm curious, who stood out to you?
Gosh, that's really hard. I mean, I would have to, the obvious answer is Mallory, who the main character, just because,
well, we see more of her than
most
anyone
of
else.
Her.
Right.
But there are, I love Joffrey, the British diplomat. I love Zaren, the colonel, the Kachin colonel, the guy from the north of the country. I love Cho-Cho, the Burmese assistant, and her grandfather, Uhlang. I mean, those are characters who were drawn directly from dear, dear friends of mine. And so I love the friends, and that hopefully that comes through in how much I love those characters.
That's why I asked, because, of course we're drawn to Mallory. She's the main character. She's the one that we see going through her own personal struggles and trying to redeem herself and all of the things. That's who we're following, but she would not be who she was without her supporting cast. Without them, the story goes nowhere. And so I love your extra characters and what they do.
How about you? Did you have a character that you love to hate or love to love?
No, I kind of just felt like they were all, like, I can't imagine the story without any of them.
Well, like it's been a long time since you read the book. So
it has been. No, but I mean, I couldn't imagine the book without any of them. I really liked, and I'm terrible with names, but I really liked the, I think it was what you said, the British guy,
yeah,
Joffrey. I found him to be humorous. He just, I liked his personality,
and just sort of pitiful and lovely and endearing, and tragic and
all at the same time. Yeah. And I could picture him in my mind. I have a distinct picture of what he looks like. Yeah. So I liked him. You once told me that I think you called them messy endings. You said that you liked a messy ending rather than the like happily ever after ending.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that. Why is it that you don't like to wrap everything out neatly into a bow?
Well, Foreigner's Confession, my first book, did get wrapped up nicely because I put in an epilogue, just because not having a clear ending really angers some readers.
It does.
and so I kind of went back with that book and plugged in the epilogue to give the happy ending, or at least the comfortable resolution. Yeah. With Worth of a Ruby, I was empowered by a particular editor from Atmosphere Press. We share this same hybrid publishing company. Mm-hmm. And she is the one. So Worth of a Ruby started out almost like an Eat, Pray, Love kind of story, which for people who are not familiar with that, it was a very, very popular, a movie was made out of it with Julia Roberts, where this woman goes on this journey to 3 different places and has her transformational experience at the end of the story. And it's a very sort of positive story. I mean, and so Worth of a Ruby was that, and it was ready to go. And then this particular, what was her name? Oh no, anyway. She read it, did the final thing, and she said, "Is this really the story you want to tell? And is this really you?" And I was like, "Wait a minute, is this really me?" And so and after much, just pain. I
was going to say deliberation where you were pulling all your hair out, I'm sure.
Exactly. I went back and rewrote the story. And so the story is not as friendly, so to speak, for the average reader. It's more challenging. There is really heavy stuff that happens. And the whole sort of theme of childhood trauma and coming to terms or not with that trauma, right, and what that does to a young woman became the main theme. And so I had to leave it open-ended as far as the ending.
When you read, do you prefer a book that wraps up nicely, or do you not mind an ending that is a little ambiguous?
I kind of like that because that makes the story stay with me a little bit longer, and it makes me sort of go, and allows me to have sort of almost like a kind of investment in the story in my mind to speculate what did that mean and what happened there. And right. So that basically means you have to have a good enough story that your reader is willing to stay there with you for that. I did get, I think I got a 3-star review and on, I don't know, Goodreads or Amazon or something. Yeah. And the woman I mean, generally I get good stars, right. 4 and 5. But the reviewer said that loved everything about this book,
Except
but
the ending.
hated the ending.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so okay, well, for some people that's going to be, so hopefully this isn't spoilers, but hang in there, readers, because
Yeah.
it's a wild ride at the end.
I think for me, I enjoy a happily ever after. I really do. I have to be in the right mood for a book. Like I have to kind of be, I don't want to be caught off guard. I think that's really what it is. If I'm reading along in a book that very much makes me feel like I'm going to have a happily ever after, and then I don't get one, I feel like I've been duped, and I don't like that.
Did you feel duped reading
No, I
this
did
story?
not. I knew as we were reading along, it was too.
Well, it was very dark. Yeah. No,
Yes.
so,
Well, there were too many things going on for everything to be wrapped up in a nice, neat bow at the end. So
okay,
it didn't feel like we were going to have everything in a nice little box and we were all going to walk away with a happily ever after. I felt like you were going to wrap it up in a way that there was a conclusion, but that we weren't necessarily going to know all the answers to all the problems. And I don't mind a book as long as it's given me that feeling on the way in. It's
right.
when I feel duped. It's when I think I'm reading a happily ever after, and then all of a sudden, at the tail end of the book, it changes and I get nothing. And then I'm like, whoa,
well,
I invested time.
Yeah, that's a poorly written book.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. It happens though. It happens. There are those
you have
times.
to have this contract with the reader. Okay, this
Right.
is what the story is going to be about. So
right.
you've got to have all of the, you know, all of the markers, you know, arrows pointing this way.
I think sometimes authors are trying to do the leave a cliffhanger because we've been told that that's, you know, like a good way to end a story, right?
Mm.
But you can't do a cliffhanger if there hasn't been a cliff throughout the book.
Oh, well said. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Well, and it's also, I realize I read, we were talking earlier about genre.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would necessarily put my books in the literary fiction genre, but I think that that's what I read. So I think that a little bit more intellectual reader, you know, might be more willing to go on that ride.
Right. I think so too. And I think sometimes it depends. Why am I reading a book? Sometimes I'm reading a book for the sheer entertainment of an escape from my little world. And I call those more of my beach reads, where I don't have to invest very much in it. I can sit and I can read and I can, you know, soak in the characters and I can walk away, you know, with their problems all solved in a nice box, and it feels good. And sometimes I need a read like that. Like there's
and
nothing.
You know what? Covers are your first indication, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So as you know, my covers are very dark, right?
Right.
And so you know,
Right.
People have a clue that there's going to be.
They don't say the worth of a ruby looks like a beach read.
Exactly.
Right. And not that you can't read it on the beach, by the way. If you're at the beach and want to read this book, it's a good one. I don't mean that. I'm just saying that there are different things that books do for you. And what are you looking for? And when I'm looking for something that's light and airy, then that's what I pick up. And then, you know, but yeah, no, I thought she did a really good job. So you've already hinted that there's another book on the way. And you said it is, where did you say it's located?
Bosnia. In former Yugoslavia.
Okay. And what era are we talking?
90s, big surprise. 90s. As far as so it's a dual timeline.
Okay.
So there's 90s is the smaller one, but maybe a third of the story, and then 2/3 of the story is set in 2017.
Okay.
So it's and the reasons for that, I don't know. A little bit of spoilers, but I don't want to necessarily explain that. But
well, then don't spoil anything.
But you know, as you know, all my stories have sort of a strange artifact in them.
Yes.
So my artifact in this book is the Sarajevo Haggadah, and if anyone has ever read Geraldine Brooks's The People of the Book, so that's the book. But basically, it could be any sort of mysterious medieval book. So this so the story is a mysterious medieval book bound with a curse of prophecy holds the key to a code capable of manipulating emotions, setting the stage for a high-stakes battle where the fate of humanity hangs in the balance.
Ooh.
So this one is basically, I'm going for a fairy tale, so folk tale kind of format. And so I'm going to have, I'm writing little like one-page folk tales. And so those will be, I took a Slavic, Russian folk tales class at Hugo House. And oh my God, that inspired me so much. And so this, using this sort of fairy tale format is what I'm doing.
Oh, that sounds lovely. I love that. It's like an experimentation a little bit, where you're trying something a little, like it is what you do, but it's a little different than what you do. And I like that as well. I don't like being stuck in a lane, like I said. I also don't like doing the same thing over and over and over again. I really like experimenting. The book that I'm currently writing, rather than being third person past tense, is first person present tense and only has one point of view. So
that is so challenging, so immediate, different.
Yeah.
You're like, wow.
Yeah. And the reason that I'm loving to do it, it's very difficult.
It's very hard.
The number of times I've had to go back and rewrite the whole paragraph because I slipped into third person past, because apparently that's what I naturally do. Yeah. But I like the idea of stretching and trying something new and seeing if I can gain more in my craft by doing something different than I did the last time.
Yes.
So I don't know, hopefully our readers will go along with our experimental rides. What do you think?
Hello, readers out there. What do you think?
What do you think? So when do you hope to have this one out? And does it have a title yet?
My working title is The 35th Page. Okay. So basically this medieval manuscript, very rare, priceless, the only one in the world, develops, a new page appears. So how can that be? Right.
Right.
So that's the working title. Whether that ends up, I don't know. I'm still a year away. I mean, it's not close. So.
Okay. All right. So those of you who have read Lya's books, you have to maybe jump out there and get on a newsletter or something so you'll know when this one's coming out. Do you have trouble with titles? Or do they just come to you?
It's sort of like someone asked me, do I have trouble naming characters? Mm-hmm. So I'll get to that. I'll answer your question just a sec. So characters kind of appear to me like fully formed. Yeah. And usually, but the last two books that I wrote are really based on personal experience, right? Because I lived and worked in Cambodia, and I lived and worked in Burma, and so can draw from that. Whereas this book that I'm writing, I have been many times to Bosnia, but I've never lived and worked there. So I'm completely inventing a new reality. And so as far as the character goes, so that is really, really challenging for me. And that's why this is taking longer, because as you know, the first two books that I did was done in 3 years, 2 books really fast. Right. But this one is going to take longer. But as far as titles, I start with a working title, and then when the book is done, then I sort of review that. So
I start with a working title, but my working title I know will never be the title, because I usually just pick one of the characters' names and then save it in my, because I'm horrible at titles. I hate titles. It's like, how are you supposed to take 82,000 words and sum it up in a title? I'm very, very bad at titles, and it just kills me. I was just curious. You seem to have an easier time of saying, oh, well, this is what it should be called. And I look at mine going, no idea.
Terry, I have a background in writing poetry. So
maybe
I wonder if that kind of, sort of distilling the essence of something and then tapping into that.
Maybe. I don't know. I look at mine. I thought that Sunflowers Beneath the Snow would eventually come out as untitled, you name it, by Terry M. Brown. I mean, it was It was horrible. We went back and forth so many times that I know they were sick of me. I would try things and they would say, no, those won't work. And then they would send me ones and I'd think, I hate
So I
those.
have the book. Remind me, were you with Atmosphere then?
Yes, I was.
All right.
I
You've
was.
been with Atmosphere the whole time.
I have been.
Okay.
Although my children's book is coming out self-published.
Yeah.
And the 2 inspirational books, I am actually going with 10 Little Rules. Which is a very small publishing company that deals specifically with inspirational books that help people like get through different aspects of their life. Gotcha. So, and it's a perfect home. I was so excited to realize that this is where I've had this manuscript sitting around for 2 years, and I knew it needed to go somewhere, but I just never found its home, and I found its home this week. I'm so excited. So yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Really good. Thank you. Yeah. So, but yeah, titles. I just.
Well, and again, it's like, I won't stay with the 35th page because though that sounds like a thriller, right?
It does. It does have that feel to it.
And this is not going to be a thriller. I mean, it will have thriller elements, but so.
Right. Yeah. So once again, you don't know really what the genre is until you're done. And then you have to go back and put it into a genre for marketing purposes, right?
Absolutely.
What did you end up saying Worth of a Ruby is genre-wise? What did they put like on your Amazon page? What is it saying that it is?
That's a good question.
You don't even know.
Historical fiction. I don't even know. But you mean as far as the metadata?
Yeah.
I think 20th century historical fiction, maybe.
Okay.
But that's the crazy thing is the 90s is really, it's not really historical fiction for us, but for certain readers it is. So
and because it's about, it wouldn't be if it was about the United States, but because it's about a country that most of your readers don't know about, it almost is historical fiction because it's talking about a time before now in a country we know nothing about.
Yes, getting the background of that country is historical. So
exactly. Yeah. I also think that it might fit a little bit maybe into women's fiction if you define it the right way. Some people think of women's fiction like as romance, but when you talk about women's fiction as a female character who develops throughout the story, she starts in one place, she moves to a different place, and that we get to go along on that ride.
Well, we're both members of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and I don't know, I have sort of an interesting relationship with the group, because some people, you come under the women's fiction umbrella, and others like, no, you're thriller suspense. So it's again, it's really hard to pin down, and oh, well, right.
That's the way I feel about mine too. It's like all 3 of mine have been dubbed historical fiction.
Yeah.
Which is fine. They are. And all 3 of them can also fit under women's fiction. And then there's a lot more going on. They're kind of literary fiction-ish, not quite, but they do have some of those elements. I don't know where to put it. My newest one, it's easy. I mean, not easy, but I'm able to call it Southern fiction because it's set exclusively in North Carolina, and Southern fiction is a thing. So I get to isn't that cool? Yeah.
Well,
so
I've heard like Barnes and Noble and different places have these wonderful, like, kick-ass women fiction. I mean, where it really drills down into it. And that's definitely, sorry, I hope that doesn't offend you or anybody using that term. But yeah, I'm definitely a kick-ass women international fiction. I mean, that would be like the perfect sort of genre.
Perfect title for you, right?
Such a thing.
Right. Well, and I think now in the way that the world is working and the fact that authors are given more and more responsibility for their own marketing, I have noticed that genres are no longer just these big, we've got romance, we've got science fiction, we've got fantasy. Now we have like very specific types of fantasy and very specific types of romance and very specific types of women's fiction and as opposed to, and not necessarily on Amazon. You can't get there on the Amazon thing, but in people's minds, they know what they're reading. Like, oh, I only read, shapeshifter romance. Well, there didn't used to be that ability to say that, and now there is. So,
And, how do you feel about that? Because I'm a little sort of like, so you don't get, I love to walk into a library and, I'm an analog person and I'm attracted to a cover and I pull it down and I go, and I'll read, to read. So you get exposed to new kinds of things.
right.
And it's only recently I've allowed myself, to get like, if I'm 50 pages in and it's, to set it aside and go, oh, well, maybe
Not for
something,
me.
not for
Yes.
me. Whereas before I would be like, I must read this, but anyway.
So I have a friend who talks about your rules for reading.
Yeah.
So her name's Stephanie Affinito, and she'll say, yeah, like, what are your rules for reading? And do you have to have them? And that's one of the rules. And I used to be that way too, where I would read even if I hated it and I would push myself through. And I've learned it's really, I don't need to do that anymore. I don't have
know.
to.
It's like freeing, right?
It is. It's very freeing. All right. So if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Lya, how do they go about doing that?
Well, I have a website that is myname.com, so lyabadgley.com. I assume you'll put that in the...
It will be in the show notes.
Yeah. So my books are available where all fine books are sold.
Yes.
I love engagement with people, and so if anyone wants to contact me with a question or I happily receive that. I'm doing tons and tons of sort of book clubs or discussion groups, and those don't. I live in the in the Seattle area, but I do those virtually as well.
So, all right. Well, thank you for being on the show, Lya.
Thank you, Terry. All the best to you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.